Hi guys, welcome back to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by a true legend in the bodybuilding world, Wesley Vissers. Known for his incredible classic physique, Wesley has not only built an iconic presence on the stage, but also amassed a massive following for his dedication to the sport and his timeless aesthetic. In this episode, we're diving into Wesley's journey from his rise to winning the Arnold Classic this past year, and also the challenges of then placing 8th at the Olympia, a topic we'll address head on right at the start. We'll also explore Wesley's athletic background, his early influences in training and nutrition, and what made him fall in love with bodybuilding. Beyond his journey, we'll unpack some training principles that Wesley shared in his very first YouTube video nearly a decade ago, lessons like intensity, progressive overload, and balancing form whilst pushing his limits. It's fascinating to see how some of these principles have stood the test of time as he's evolved into one of the most respected names in the sport. Plus, we'll get an inside look into his recent training camp with Coach Stefan, including the key lessons he's learned and his take on the fundamentals of training. And guys, if you've enjoyed this episode, please do make sure to share it. Take a screenshot, share it over on Instagram, tag myself, tag Wesley, make sure that we know that you're listening and watching. Share it with anyone else you think might be interested. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss future episodes. Give us a thumbs up, maybe a rating over on Spotify. That'd be highly appreciated. The bigger the podcast is, the more ears that we get to, the bigger and better names we can get on the show too, and I can continue to attract amazing people like Wesley. So guys, this episode is packed with wisdom, inspiration, and practical advice for anyone who loves bodybuilding, whether or not you're just starting out or deep into your journey. So grab a coffee, tune in, and let's get into it. Wesley, before we dig into some maybe background behind you, I wanted to dig into maybe a juicy question, maybe a potentially sensitive question. I don't know. I don't think it will be. But it's relating to, obviously, you came off winning the Arnold and then you went into the Olympia and you're on a high and then coming 8th at the Olympia. How did that feel? It's obviously been quite a while now. Yeah. What was your initial kind of feelings? How do you feel about it now?
Honestly, the moment that it happened, like I didn't know the placing right away, of course, the prejudging, but you kind of know that you're not in the top 5. And I felt quite defeated backstage because, as you mentioned, winning the Arnold, you get so much hype behind it and behind you, behind your name. You get to the press conference at the Olympia, which is pretty rare. Like only the big stars go there usually to talk about the show. And I felt very honored to be taken into all of that. And then to not get the placing I thought I could with the shape I brought was kind of defeating backstage. But then I was like, okay, like at any show that I ever lost, I'm like, okay, what could I have done differently that I could have placed better? Because I'm never... Like I mentioned being defeated, but that only lasts for like a few minutes. And then I'm like, okay, what can I do better next time? Because you're never perfect. You will never be perfect. So there's always something you can do to be better. And that's kind of what I thought, but you still had to go through the opinions of a lot of other people. Because I don't, it's kind of weird to say, but I don't care that much about the placings in general. Like for a long time, because I work towards a new goal anyway, but it's dealing with the people around you, because a lot of people have expectations for you on social media, but also like here I have my own gym. So a lot of people have seen me train hard. They've given me space to focus, not bother me and stuff like this. And then they even had a live watch party here at the gym, and yourself, that requires quite some effort because the time zone difference. So they actually gathered here like very early and very late at night as well to watch me on stage, and then to not deliver what everybody thought I could have delivered, like the top 3 or top 5. That's the most difficult part for me, the dealing with the opinions that others may have and having to explain it over and over again when I'm pretty much already past it and going to the next thing, So that's, so right after the show, kind of disappointed, but I just wanted to find out, okay, what happened? Why didn't I place as high as I could, and what can we do about it? Yeah.
I love, and thank you for your honest thoughts in terms of like obviously feeling defeated. I think it just shows you care. Obviously you care. Yeah. I think it would be wrong if anyone wasn't kind of if you weren't upset, angry, or feeling that way in some sense, because it's like you're a competitor after all. And yeah, obviously you came off the high, and then others got more expectations upon you, and it's not just like you're competing therefore for yourself, which that'd be great. You're not not that you're letting other people down in that way, but now they have expectations, so then you're bearing all of their feelings and thoughts upon you as well. But I love that you mentioned you kind of took that moment to feel that way, but you didn't let it hold on too long. You then focused on what could I do better to improve upon next time. I'd love to hear about what those kind of things are going to be for you.
Yeah, so I'm very glad that people that I care about and who know a lot about the process went with me to the Olympia, such as my coach, of course. So he is a really hands-on guy. So the moment that I didn't make the placing we thought I could make, he came to me, and we saw each other pretty quick, and he explained to me right away, okay, it's always going to be some interesting placings going on in the top 10 sometimes, and usually I am at the bottom end of when they can choose, okay, we have the top 5, but 5 to 10 we can kind of put them in different orders, but usually when that happens I'm usually at the back end of it, even though I could have been 6th or I could have been 9th, doesn't really matter, but usually I'm more towards the back end of that. And we kind of talked about that kind of what I expected, because usually that happens with me at the Olympia, because I'm different. And when I'm not perfect, when I'm not peaked perfectly, when I'm not super full or super conditioned, then usually they put me more to the back because I'm difficult to compare to the rest. So me and my coach, we talked about that. And because we didn't really think some of the guys who beat me should have beat me, but that's always up to debate as it's a subjective sport. But I put that aside quite quickly because you can't do anything about that anyway. But what we could do something about is something that we saw in my physique, that I have some strong points in my physique that no one else has, but I also have some weak points that the others do have strong points such as the back, the hindsight of the legs, basically. So the glutes, the hamstrings, like you could say, oh, your classic physique, they should care more about the arms, the chest, the back, the V-taper, which I all have in spades. Even like if you look at the comparisons, better than most of the guys, even like all the way up until Chris Bumstead, for example. But when you compare the legs, especially from the back, that has always been my weak point. And then we thought about it, and we thought, okay, the weak point that I have is probably stronger or weaker than my strong points are over their strengths. So the weak point is kind of -3, and my strong points are +2. So it brings me down too much, even though the rest is strong. Like the weak point is too glaring for the judges to ignore, because you have to focus on something. You have to find something that justifies the placing I got, and they don't just place anybody randomly. There's always a professional thought behind it. So you always going to look at it like this, because as you know, you've been doing competitions for many years. It would be stupid to just say, oh, I should have been placed higher and that's it. How are you ever going to improve upon yourself if that's what you think? So I just find the biggest weak point I have, and that's what we've been working on quite hard, I must say, to make things very different for the next competition. So those two things are really what we've talked about right after the show.
Yeah, I really respect that response, in that it would be easy to try and blame the judges and say it's subjective or whatever, but you're taking that kind of you're taking self-efficacy here, and you're putting the control back in your hands and seeing what can you do to be better. And I think you described that really well, in that your physique is definitely different to the other guys. I was thinking about that today as we were kind of coming on air, and I was like, yeah, I mean, when I think of classic, again, like you said, the legs aren't such a thing, and all the areas you described are areas you have in spades. But again, classic and the way that they judge it evolves over time. And obviously Chris Bumstead has been taking that for a long, long time. So he's kind of like the thing to be looking at. And in terms of symmetry, his legs are like matching a lot of those areas. So it makes sense that happens to you. But also what you mentioned, and I agree with you, past the top 5, it gets hard to judge a lot of people in a short period of time. And so outside of the top 5, I agree with you. Like, it isn't just you saying it. You could be 6th, you could be 9th. Like, the differences between you there are going to be very, very minor. And then against the top 5, yeah, it's just difficult to judge a physique that looks quite different to the rest. I know this with like weight categories. You have someone who's like tall in like a weight category and everyone else is of a height. It's like that tall person just stands out, and they're kind of hard to judge and compare to the rest. So maybe they're be put to the end. So it is challenging, but there's like top trumps. I always think about, you have strengths, you have weaknesses, and you just have to try and bring the most balance. So you mentioned posterior chain as an area of focus, which is probably quite brutal training. What's that looking like for you to kind of bring that up?
Yeah, so usually, like, I've always started my training anyway with a leg curl, for example, as I knew that the hamstrings have always been a point of improvement. But now I've been training with my fiance Marley, and she, it might sound like, oh, that's not that difficult, but she, like, to give a little context, when we first got together, before we were even officially dating, she likes to test out guys by doing a leg workout together to see, okay, is this guy really up to par with my standards? So we were doing like walking lunges with like 100 kilos, like 225 pounds. Like, even she did that almost. So I was like, what the hell is going on? Every time I'm going up in weight, she's matching my weight, and she's doing it correctly as well. I'm like, whoa, this is a different story. And then she just keeps going and going. And I'm like, I have to match this intensity because, yeah, I can't let her beat me in this, because I know this is kind of like a test to see if I'm the correct guy for her, And that's even how our entire relationship started. And now she knows how much is on the line, because at the beginning I wasn't even a pro yet. I was just pretty much a Dutch, top Dutch bodybuilder, but nothing international yet. So, but even back then we trained pretty hard. But now we are truly focused on life-changing opportunities here, and we have 2 children. We have a house, so there's a lot of incentive for me to do well at these shows as well. So there's a lot of things going on at the same time that motivates us to train as hard as possible. So now we start out, for example, with a hip thrust first, to truly get those glutes engaged, because I haven't really done any exercise in my past consistently that focuses on isolating those glutes. So you always have different kind of squat or leg press variations you can do, but nothing I've ever done has truly isolated those glutes. And I know when I isolate the chest or I isolate the biceps, they get a great effect. So I needed something in there that really isolates them, and we have like a machine for it that you can load up quite heavy. And she knows exactly if I have a rep left in the tank, so she pushes me to the max. So we do 4 sets really to failure there, and sometimes with a drop set or like a very slow set or any like intensity techniques there to ensure, okay, at the beginning of the workout, at least we targeted those glutes. That's already out of the way. And then we move to like a leg curl variation, either a seated or a laying leg curl, also 3 to 4 sets to get a lot of volume in that way. And then we move to a glute variation unilateral squat, like a Smith machine, a Bulgarian split squat, for example, or we have a free squat machine that is also can target the glutes that way, also unilateral. And pretty much at the very end, that's where we go to the quads. So all our training, all our workouts are focused on the back of the legs, basically. And then the quads are pretty much, they are comparable to a lot of the top guys anyway. That you can see that when you compare me on stage to the rest. So that's really not the primary part of improvement, even though it's still in my plan. But you gotta sometimes sacrifice some volume in some places in order to really improve something else. And that for me is the glutes and the hamstrings. So at least twice a week, we do a high volume 2-hour high intensity leg workout like this, to ensure we get the volume in to make those muscles grow.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds brutal. And yeah, she sounds like, I think there's, a lot of guys at least will think of females training and they think of your average person in the gym, and like a lot of women go in there and they're not necessarily pushing themselves hard. Same for men, to be honest. But when you get women who can push hard, and the endurance that they have, the number of grinders they can do, it's something else that a lot of men can't do. I don't know if it's something about them being a bit more slow twitch dominant or whatever, their recovery capacity is higher. So when you're trying to match them, it's something else and really tough training. So
it is.
That's brutal. I imagine when you were first getting into that, maybe you got quite a lot of DOMs through the glutes that you hadn't experienced before.
Yeah, a lot. Like a couple of workouts, I kept feeling like you've trained chest for the first time. I still remember it to this day. Like you can't move your arm for like a week. I had the same thing in my glutes. Like the hamstrings, I've been quite used to training quite hard, but the glutes, that's a different story. So I'm really quite positive you will see some changes at the Arnold for sure.
That's exciting. Yeah, how you're in prep now for the Arnold, right?
Yep, we're in prep.
How many weeks are you out now? I can't even think how long it is now.
I always have like a timer on my phone so I can remind myself exactly how many days. And it's 56 days as of now. So 8 weeks to go.
Oh, how's prep going for you? Is it feeling smooth?
Yeah, quite. It's going quite smooth. The only difficult part a little bit was the holidays as they coincided with the start of the prep. So that's always a little challenging as you have a family. You kind of want to, enjoy in the festivities, but at the same time, not mess up the start of your prep. So that's always a little challenging. But other than that, things are going very, very smoothly. And I'm also less inclined to look at my weight drop as much as I usually want to feel safe and make my weight drop quite quickly at the beginning. So I feel not as rushed at the end. But honestly, at the Olympia, it cost me a little bit of fullness, which I did bring at the Arnold, and I didn't bring at the Olympia, which only in hindsight I realized, because you're always like, okay, the sooner I'm done with the fat loss part, the better it's going to be. I'm going to grow into the show and freshen up. But it's in reality, you're having to survive more weeks on that low body fat percentage. And it actually can drive up fatigue if you don't do it correctly. And for me, I just was in shape so early on that I couldn't apparently hold on to the fresh fullness that a tall physique like mine needs on stage.
Yeah, I remember seeing you, like I think I said off air when I saw shots of you at the Arnold, and I was like, wow, like you were as shredded as almost I could ever think or they would desire for Classic. And along with the shreds were apparent because you're also nice and full and fresh. And I know exactly, and I think a lot of competitors will know what you're talking about, where you do get into that zone of like no man's land of condition, where if you spend too much time in that area, you just start just kind of shrinking. You can be shredded and you can be kind of a bit full, but that pop just doesn't quite come there. So it sounds like this time around, you might come into the Arnold a bit fuller, not quite as conditioned as you've been before, but that's to allow you to come even better into the Olympia.
Yeah. It's all about the total package, because you're very right. You don't have to be as super conditioned as you can be if it sacrifices your shape overall. Because I found Steve Weinberger's criticism of me, which is of course almost the number one criticism you want to hear, or feedback, let's just say. And he's the head judge of the Olympia and also the Arnold. And he said, I wasn't as full at the Olympia as the Arnold, so you have to take that seriously. And that's when I started to look, is that really true? And then, you could see the pop I had at the Arnold simply wasn't there as much at the Olympia. And it's even these small things that can, make or break your placing. And he also mentioned that if I would have showed up at the Olympia with my Arnold shape, like, quote, who knows where he would have placed? And he mentioned it in a way that it could have been very, very high, which gives me hope that I've already shown a physique that is capable of a very high Olympia placing as well. So, in my head, I'm like, okay, the only thing I have to do is replicate that look at least. But I know I can also be better than that, because I have now been focusing on fixing some of those points of improvement in my physique. So when I'm even more proportionate and then still bring that freshness to the stage with enough conditioning and the fullness, that should bring an even better package, especially with now my competitor, who pretty much the number one competitor for me at the Arnold is going to be Mike Sommerfeld, who is a very complete, real bodybuilder, in my opinion. So you need to be a complete competitor as well to be able to face off against someone like him.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I'm excited to see what you bring to that. I know Terence, who I had on the podcast not that long ago, he's also going to be doing the Arnold as far as I'm aware. So it's exciting to see kind of, people that I really follow closely. I haven't followed Mike super closely, but you're right. He has a really impressive physique, and he was challenging Chris, of course. But it's like you mentioned, or like the head judge was mentioning, at your level, it's like top sprinters at the Olympics. It's milliseconds that are the difference between you. It's the smallest little thing. If you're just a little bit off or a little bit on, you can take placings like all over the place. And for people that don't compete, especially at that high of a level, you kind of don't quite realize, like, all of you are absolutely outstanding. You show like a Gen Pop person, any one of you, and they would all think you are the best in the world because you are that good. But that means every little detail and every little factor counts. And I think it's super clear from having spoken to you, Terence, like, everyone takes it incredibly seriously. You don't rest on your laurels, rest on, genetic benefits that you might have in the background. So I really appreciate that about you guys. I don't know if you have anything more to say on that. Otherwise, I was going to jump and talk about some of the things that got you into classic bodybuilding in the first place.
Sure, let's do it.
Cool. So I was interested if before you got into bodybuilding specifically, if there are any sports you did beforehand.
Yeah, I did gymnastics for a couple of years. I think it was 4 years. And I noticed that I was quite good at most of the acrobatic skills, but what I liked doing the most is body weight pull-ups and ring stuff, like testing my strength, basically. Instead of like the art form, I liked the performance about it more. But I was very young. I think like from 9 to 13, I did that. And at one point, I've always been a big introverted person. So at some point during my gymnastic class, we were going to do an official competition, like with other classes in the Netherlands. You come together and you basically do like a local/national competition. And that's kind of when I was like, oh, wait a second, I just want to do this for fun. I don't want to do an actual competition of this. And that's when I quit the whole thing, because it was like, this is not for me. But then my parents were like, well, you got to do some kind of sport or movement, because I was a gamer as well. So I had to compensate that with something. And then my dad has always been kind of like a bodybuilder, but not doing shows, but going to the gym with the purpose of being strong and muscular. So he looked the part as well. And I thought that was awesome as well. So when I was 14, that was the legal age for me to go to the gym, because younger than that, we were not allowed, because people back then still thought it would mess up your growth plates, stuff like that. So a lot of old school bro science going on back then. But when I was 14, the first day I joined that gym with my dad, and he explained everything to me, how to train properly, first I had to do my cardio. So I had to do some kind of movement, then went to the machines. So to learn, okay, with the chest press, it's not just about moving the handles, but actually using the chest. So focus on the muscle that's required for this machine. And once I was able to do that, then I was allowed free weights, so with a dumbbell. And that's how I slowly progressed to more advanced stuff. And I kind of fell in love with it after a couple of months. But the first few weeks/months, I didn't like it at all, because I was doing quite a lot of effort without any results, in my opinion. I didn't see much. I didn't immediately see in the mirror any changes, because I was very skinny at the beginning, meaning I didn't eat enough. Genetically, I was like, I almost looked like an ectomorph, but just with a broad bone structure. So I was very light and thin. So I couldn't really see any progress in muscle building, but I was quite strong for some reason. So I used to do arm wrestling and challenges with other classmates, and I was easily beating all of them, and I didn't know why, except for that me thinking, well, my dad is quite strong, maybe I got it from him somehow. And but in the gym, it proved to work out quite well because I could use quite heavy weights, and it built muscle quite quickly because of it. Because I mentioned that mind muscle connection I had to learn at the beginning, pairing that with heavier weight, so more the tension on the muscle, mechanical tension increases more that way, and that's when I started to grow quite quickly after like half a year. And that's when I really started to like it, because when you make progress, that's when you start to enjoy the sport, of course. And that's, yeah, that was the beginning basically of my journey.
That's super cool to hear about. I imagine the body weight training that you did ahead of time too kind of gave you at least like it gave you a head start against someone just getting in there in the first place, but it doesn't sound like it grew you a ton of muscle. So
No.
calisthenics aren't the way to get super jacked, that's for sure. They can get you somewhere.
Yeah, but I remember, like, for me, it was just a natural thing to be able to pull up multiple times or just to hold yourself like this without any effort. Like, for me, it was a normal thing. So in that way, it kind of translated to like a lat pull down, for example. I was like, okay, I can pull my body weight up, so I should at least be able to do my body weight in lat pull down, right? That's how I kind of selected my starting weight, and which means it was quite heavy compared to like classmates that I worked out with. They did like half of the weight that I did. I was like, why are they so weak, or am I just strong, or what's going on here? And only after a couple of, yeah, pretty much 1 or 2 years, I realized I have a talent for building muscle, but I didn't know that at the beginning. But yeah, once you notice the results, then you start to like it more and more.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where when people do before and after transformations, it's like before they even lifted to like now they've, I don't know, been in a decade. It's like, well, everyone before you've lifted, you haven't even given the stimulus really to see what your genetic proclivity is. Once you've started and then like a year or two on, that's when you know, like, I seen gains ahead of the other people around me. And it sounds like you saw that, which is really cool. And you had a head start though, because your dad being into bodybuilding, and actually the process you talked through there sounded really good in terms of, hey, learn machines, mind muscle connection, then we go into free weights. So you had a nice head start there. What were your, along with your dad, what other were your like go-to sources for education when you were coming up?
Yeah, so the first few years, honestly, it was my dad and other people at the gym. As the owner of the gym used to be a bodybuilder himself doing actual competitions. And they actually went to like the Dutch Grand Prix in 2006 where Ronnie Coleman competed. So I heard all those stories of them competing, of watching other bodybuilders. So I kind of learned from them. And like the personal trainers there, they were actually bodybuilders themselves. So or used to be bodybuilders. So they had a lot of knowledge about what it takes to build muscle. And whenever they saw me train, they either corrected me a little bit or made an example out of me how to train correctly. Like when you do full range of motion, like they really hammered on full range of motion even back then, without any of the papers or the science behind it back then yet. They already knew if you it's kind of bro science, but it still works out anyway. They were like, if you want a full muscle belly like Wesley in his bicep, you have to do that full range of motion as well. Even though we all know it's genetically determined, the length of your muscle belly, they will still like, well, full range of motion will at least give you the biggest growth in that muscle you can get. And that's with anything. So like with the bench press, make sure that the bar touches your chest. Like all of these cues I got from those bodybuilders around the gym, even though at the time I didn't even realize they were ever competitive bodybuilders to begin with. I just was like, they were adults, people I looked up to who were also strong, who looked quite big as well, just like my dad. And that's what I took advice from until around 2011. I went to the FIBO for the first time, which is the biggest expo of bodybuilding and fitness in the world. And that's when I saw like 2010, I think even, that's when I saw all the bodybuilders who I heard about in real life. Like even Ronnie Coleman back then was still very big. And Phil Heath, I saw, Jay Cutler. Like I was absolutely amazed by how big those guys were in real life. Because I'm from a small farmer's town. I didn't have social media really. I didn't watch much YouTube. And even though I saw some bodybuilders here and there on a video, for example, I didn't know what it really looked like until I saw them in real life. And that going to the FIBO, and the funny thing is, not just the bodybuilders there who are having a booth, but also just people walking around, realizing that there's a lot of jacked people in the world. Actually, I back then I quite quickly was one of the more jacked guys in the gym. Like I felt like one of the biggest guys. But once you go to the FIBO, you're like, wait a second, I'm one of the smallest guys here now. And that inspired me a lot to know there's a lot more potential here than I thought. There's a lot more room to grow. And that's when I started following some of those bodybuilders on their social media, like YouTube started a little bit around then. Like some bodybuilders started their YouTube channel, like Antoine Vaillant, for example, from Canada. Like he started really early, and he was also quite young, like in his early 20s back then. And I took inspiration from what they were doing with nutrition and training. And you know, at one point, the local knowledge in your gym kind of ends, and you got to find new resources. And that's when I used YouTube basically for to learn more about it.
Do you not see the progress you would like? Are you sick of writing your own programs? Or perhaps you need some accountability in order to stick with a plan? Then it's time to start working with us. We at Revive Stronger offer a truly personalized coaching service. You'll get more than just an email with some macros or random cookie cutter program. With Revive Stronger, you will be the center of our attention. You will receive your own fully individualized training protocol alongside a customized nutritional strategy. We create the coaching around your needs, wants, personal preferences, and your own unique lifestyle. Every single week, we delve into your program in order to make appropriate adjustments so that we get the most out of your time and the best possible outcome. We help both female and male athletes to seriously change their body composition by adding more muscle mass and decreasing fat tissue. Additionally, you get access to our exclusive Revive Stronger member site, where you'll be able to watch over hundreds of hours worth of educational content. No matter if you're a competitive bodybuilder or just want to look better, if you need help with your progress and taking your physique to the next level, our coaching is for you. It's time to make a change. Sign up today and let's revive stronger.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you kind of, I think, are you a similar age to me, early 30s, mid 30s?
Yeah, 31.
31, yeah. So I'm 34, and yeah, so it sounds like similar to me. My initial resources were the jack guys in the gym, personal trainers there, and then it became the internet and like, hey, blogs and forums and things like that, and then YouTube fitness. Matt Ogus was the person I kind of found and took me down a certain path. So sounds very, very familiar in that regard. And I love the growth mindset you clearly had from a young age. Like, hey, I saw these big jack dudes, and it wasn't a case of, man, I'm never going to get there or whatever. It's like, hey, how are they so big? I want to be that big. Like, what can I do? And you still have that growth mindset today, which is so nice and such a great way to be. Talking of YouTube, actually, I look back at your first video. So you did a video 9 years ago with your brother, and you were training arms. And I was listening to it, and there's so many things you talked about in that video in terms of you did a voiceover, and it was like an educational vlog essentially. So many things. I was like, man, these are still things we say today. Like you mentioned, full range of motion. So I'd love if I could walk through some of these key principles and see if there's still things you agree with, or if your perspective of them has slightly changed. So one of them you mentioned at the start there, and I mean, you can just talk through some of these points maybe, because I think there's some that are just undisagreeable, like this first one. You said big focus is intensity and consistency. How key is that to you now?
Still, especially consistency, even more than back then, because back then I went to the gym. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do in terms of the exact exercises, but I did know, okay, it's back, rear delts, and biceps today, and we're going to do at least this and this and this movement. But some movements are still, depending on if they're free or not, I wouldn't wait for a movement, for example, to be free. I would just do something else. But now that I have my own gym, it's literally, okay, this is exactly what I'm going to do. This is how many reps I did. This is how much weight I did. And this is what I need to match or improve. And back then I didn't log any of my lifts. The only reason why I logged them is to show them in the video, to see, okay, that's how many sets I did, that's how much weight, because people in the comments were like, we want to know what the workout is. And I was like, okay, let's put the workout down, how much weight I do, because I knew that was the interesting stuff about my videos, that everything, you didn't have any questions anymore. Like everything was laid out basically. And that was kind of the strengths of those videos back in the day when not a lot of people did that. But yeah, consistency is still very much a thing. And of course, intensity as well. Just going as heavy as you can with correct form, without volume taking over that intensity basically.
Yeah, so important. And it's funny how when you start, you don't need to worry so much about logging. Well, not that that's when you start. You're 9 years in. You're actually really jacked in the video, to be honest. But to get those next level gains, like logbooking, making sure that you're progressively overloading, just becomes absolutely essential. So, and something else you mentioned in the video, and I was surprised how much you actually brought it up, was like how important the stretch is.
Yeah.
Is that still something you very much are focused on?
Yeah, very much. The stretch, because I had a very, for me, it was always easy to train correctly because I really felt the muscle. Like when you do a fly or a bicep curl, I could really feel I have to go this far into the stretch because otherwise the feeling isn't complete. It's like you have a contraction, but you also go into the stretch. You can feel that mind-muscle connection stretch there. But if you don't go all the way into the stretch, you're feeling like you're missing something. And that kind of came to me intuitively at the beginning. And I realized they go together. Like from Arnold, I learned mind-muscle connection is important. And then I knew full range of motion is important. And at the end, I get the mind-muscle connection combined with a full range of motion. And I was like, okay, you gotta go into that stretch, because that must be important to tick off both of those boxes at the same time. So I've always emphasized that, because without the stretch, you don't have a full range of motion at all. You're just sticking to half reps. And I always realized that's not the way to progress in bodybuilding.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I think a lot of, at least when I see people who struggle to grow as well, often when you talk to them, they don't have that intuitive way of moving the body. Or if you coach someone who's been like an athlete before, like for you, you're already doing all of your training beforehand, you probably had some intuition of like doing the pull-ups. So that pull down kind of came naturally to you. Yeah. Whereas you take someone who hasn't done those sort of like movements, they're like, do a hip hinge. And they're like, how do I even move? So you kind of had that intuitively. And I think that probably helped your growth. It's probably part of genetics and to some extent as well, where you can just like connect with movements. You also mentioned, and you mentioned a few times, full range of motion, but in the video you particularly said peak contraction. Is something like peak contraction still something you focus on?
Yeah, with some movements I do, with others a little less, because I realized, like, for example, today I trained chest. On a chest press, if you want to go into the peak contraction, at the same time you're stretching the arm, you're extending the arm all the way, which means that the tension is also on your elbow, on your joints. So at the beginning, you feel indestructible because none of your joints hurt, none of your tendons are messed up. You feel your muscles in the pump. But after a while, you start to notice kind of that you're getting older. And I noticed that if I do, for example, a bench press or a chest press or anything like that, and try to go into the peak contraction and force it that way, I also kind of stack the joints together, and that doesn't really correlate with the best results in the end, because yes, you get that contraction, but also kind of wear and tear in the joints. So now that I've been working with my coach and doing research with other bodybuilders online, with other professionals, You can get still into the contraction fully by, instead of thinking about extending the arm, for example, on the chest press, just think about bringing the biceps together. And once you feel that contraction, then you go back already. Instead of trying to like force it, you almost also push the shoulders forward, which then kind of round your shoulders, which can then overdevelop those instead of focusing on the chest. So there's kind of a balance to be struck there. But in other movements, like a bicep curl, I still, even though it has not been proven in science yet, you can mold certain muscles a little differently if you go into that extreme contraction. Like if you, like I can squeeze my bicep so hard, it almost hurts to the point like it's gonna explode. Like it's pretty extreme, but you can literally feel almost the two bicep heads carving that bicep peak, like the separation between the two bicep heads. If you do a concentration curl, I can literally feel one of those heads, like the outer head, contracting more than the inner head because you're going so hard into that contraction. I can just feel, like with that mind-muscle connection again, that you're molding that muscle just a bit differently after year after year after year of doing it just a bit more intense like this. And also like a rope tricep extension. Like you can either focus only on the stretch and then go 80% down and go up again. But then if you never go into that peak contraction, you're never going to then carve in those little details in the tricep. Like of course, what I'm saying now is bro science, but I think in the future it might be proven to be correct. Because some bodybuilders who don't have like the chest striations or the tricep striations, if you watch them train, they almost only focus on that stretch part and never on the true contraction. I do believe, even though nowadays the papers say that the stretch is the most important part, if you then always skip over that extreme contraction, you're going to miss out on some key development, which is not just the muscle mass, but also the details in the muscle. Because when you do a side chest, you want to get those details into the chest. But if you never ever contract it during training, except for when you're doing a side chest, how are you then going to showcase something beyond what you've trained for? Like it's an interesting way to think about it, but I've always believed when I look at myself during a tricep extension in the mirror, and you can only see those striations in the tricep once you go into that full extension. If you don't, it's never going to appear, so it's never going to like carve in those details. And yeah, I don't really have another way to explain this, but to me, it's something I've believed in since the beginning, and it has shown results in my muscle quality that not a lot of other bodybuilders have. It's like, yes, other bodybuilders have more round muscles, or like they seem to have fuller muscles, but it's a different quality. And I'm really going for the quality in the muscle and then growing it out that way, which to me is the more impressive way to showcase how far you can push your physique. So it's always a balance to be struck there, of course, but I think you should at least not skip over it entirely.
Really interesting. Yeah, I think it's like you said, kind of with the growing body of literature that's looking at range of motion and kind of comparing short peak contraction partials versus like long muscle length partials. And I think it's still a growing body of evidence. And I think you're using that alongside kind of experts or people with lots of experience within the field, along with your own experience, to be like, okay, this is the way I want to go. If science hasn't said it's a complete like bad thing to do, I'm probably not going to not do it because it's clearly providing me results. And it's kind of, you mentioned something at the start where it's like, I think it was someone, maybe a coach or someone was describing something you should be doing, even though we haven't got like scientific evidence for it yet, but it just feels kind of right to you, and using your intuition at that time. And I think that's like an absolutely fair way to go. I think a lot of the listeners, unfortunately, are probably people who really want a PubMed study to say this is the way to do it, but we're not going to get that. It's all just kind of pointing us in the right direction. And a lot of what the bros were doing in the past has shown to be correct, and some of it less correct, and we're being a bit more refined. And it sounds like you're trying to get to like, what is the explanation to why I'm seeing benefits from this kind of peak contraction. And like you said, it could even be that if I never go there, I can't show it off on stage quite right. It's making me think of, for example, with my glutes. Similar to you, I never did any glute isolation stuff. I've started to incorporate it, and I'm like, I have big glutes, but I'm not quite getting those details in them. Is it just a lack of, could it be contraction? Like I just don't know how to kind of fully push my hips fully through, and maybe doing the hip thrusts that I'm now doing, they'll start showing it. So I think that's very, very interesting, and a great insight from you. Something else you mentioned in the video was, and something that's debated within kind of, I guess the evidence-based sphere to some extent, is use of lighter loads. Some people will say, hey, lighter loads cause more fatigue, and so we should just focus on kind of that heavier loading range. But you mentioned using lighter loads, especially for isolation-based movements, to keep the kind of target muscle under the flame, and also to reduce injury risk in some cases. What loading range do you currently use? Are you still using some lighter loading?
Yeah, especially with the smaller muscle groups like our biceps, rear delts, side delts. Like, I don't believe if you use heavy loads in those muscles, that is going to make those muscles grow without sacrificing, like, first of all, risk of injury, which you have to think about after a few years, but also, like, a practical example, if you go heavy on the side delts, is going to use the traps as well. As the heavier you go, the more you're inclined, at least your body is inclined, to make it more efficient by using other muscle groups. So it only is going to make it more difficult to get into that muscle. And that is one thing I can appreciate about the science of nowadays, is saying 5 to 30 reps is pretty much the range you can do for the same hypertrophy results, so the same muscle growth results. So it kind of now feels even backed up that I used to always do like 25 reps for the side delts, like pretty much 25, 20, 15, 12 with like a pyramid down scheme I used to do for the side delts. For biceps, at least 15 plus reps. Like also tricep extension, I also like to do a little higher rep, just to ensure I really use that muscle and not include any other muscle groups in there. That's most important, but also to keep that mind muscle connection, to really keep it there, instead of like, I'm using the muscle, but I'm not really feeling the muscle. And to me, that's still an important thing. Like, especially with isolation movements, when you do compounds, it's going to be a bit more challenging, of course, when you're doing a leg press, to really feel like the quads, or to separate those muscles in your mind. But with isolation movements, going with a lighter load and focusing on truly that full range of motion, getting blood in there, the mind-muscle connection, those remain staples in my way of training.
Yeah, I think that's really well explained. Oh, out of interest, what's the heaviest you tend to go in reps?
I used to go 6 was the heaviest, because this was my dad's rule. If you can do at least 6 reps, you can go heavier next time. So when you do like a lat pull down, you can do 6 reps. The next time you're going to try 5 kilos more with that same rep range. And that's how I automatically, progressively overloaded back then. So I used to warm up by doing 10 rep sets all the way until I met a set I couldn't do 6 reps with. That was literally the only rule we had. And then, of course, at one point, okay, this is in order not to have 10 sets, this is the weight I'm going to start with. Then do 10, 10, 10, 10, and then maybe 5 or 6. And then next time, you only remember the last set, and then you're trying to go heavier with that. That's how simple I used to train for like 5 or 6 years, and I grew quite well. But once you start to realize, okay, my physique is going quite well, but there are some lagging body parts, that's when you start to specialize in other rep ranges and start to go in like a higher rep range. Because if I go too heavy on the squat, I know I'm not focusing really on the muscle, but more on like a powerlifting movement, basically. Instead of like going to 15 reps, I get a really good pump in the legs. But with 6 reps, I just feel like it's a wall dropping on me, and I have to try to push it up. And when I'm done with the set, I'm like, okay, that was difficult, but am I really feeling it in the muscle now? Not really. So after a while, you start with like everything has the same rule, and what grows well, you keep doing the same. but what doesn't grow as well, you kind of change up into a different scheme. And that's how my training evolved. So only changing things that are necessary to change, to still keep it a little simple for myself. And over time, my training has evolved kind of in that manner.
I think that makes so much sense. It's similar, like if I start up a new client, I'm like, I'm not going to build the perfect program to you initially because I've got basic information that I'm going to try and kind of customize it, but it's then listening and iterating off the feedback we're getting to make it customized to you. And that's going to change over time as you grow and develop. And actually in this video, you mentioned it, you're like, hey, I don't really do that much volume for my shoulders because they seem to grow really well. So I save that kind of volume and I put it towards other areas. Mm-hmm. You also mentioned, interestingly in there, that you don't do any direct anterior delt work because you get lots through your pressing. Is that still something you apply today?
Yeah, I haven't had a separate shoulder day in pretty much since then. So I sometimes I put up a shoulder workout on YouTube because people want to see it. And then I'm like, okay, let's do a shoulder workout and show people how I would train the shoulders. But even then, only at the very end, I would do some front raises and maybe a variation of like an Arnold press, but nothing, no heavy military presses or something. Only the side and rear delts get the full attention and the front delt just a tiny bit. But it's never been necessary for me to separately train those, no.
I think it's so interesting looking at this video and so many things you've already mentioned in terms of like the importance of technique, progressive overload, those sort of things, and like training muscles at different angles. These are still things that are holding true today. It kind of makes me think of like, we're learning as we go, but it's just you're kind of learning how to apply those initial principles that you knew at the start better and better to your own physique and your own training. Something you had within that video were force reps. And I think I watched with your coach Stefan, and he was kind of assisting you with some force reps. Is that still an intensity technique you use regularly?
Yeah, only when I feel really recovered in the off season. And Stefan really did it to show me how capable you really are of doing a certain movement. So he's doing it to kind of open your eyes to, okay, do you think you know what failure is? Here is what it really feels like to really go all the way with this movement. And which muscles do you feel now? It's like more of an eye opener than saying, okay, do this every single time. But I used to do this so much, like drop sets, like even Arnold's back and chest superset days, like arms and like biceps and triceps, like I've done it all basically. But the more muscle mass I got, the more difficult it was to do those supersets and force reps and drop sets consistently. And that's also another thing I took from science, is that it's for overall fatigue management and progress in muscle growing, it's still going to be a net positive, better compared to all those intensity techniques if you just stick to straight sets, recover in between those sets, as boring as that sounds after a while. But your training shifts from having fun to really only going for fun to, okay, how can I make the most out of this workout? So how can I still at set number 4 make the most out of this set? Like I used to do a chest press at the beginning and even do a drop set right after the first movement already, which now I know kind of takes away from all of the other movements you're going to do for chest. So if I do a drop set now, it would be at the very end of a workout instead of at the beginning. But back then I was like, okay, the sooner I can get a pump, the better I get a blood flow feeling in the muscle, the better it's going to be overall. And yes, it did work. But as I mentioned a while ago as well, it works for certain muscle groups, but not for all. Like for the back, for me, it doesn't work. For legs, it doesn't work. For chest and arms, okay. Those are strong muscle groups anyway, so they'll probably grow regardless. So you can't really say that that's going to be the technique that's responsible for the growth. But it still felt good, so I did it. And I learned a lot from it. But now I weigh quite a lot in terms of the amount of muscle mass I have compared to back then. So it's going to be more and more difficult to recover from those intensity techniques compared to before. Not to mention, I was younger, no children, so I slept a lot longer. I had a lot less distractions. And now there's a lot more going on. So you kind of got to go with the most efficient training possible instead of like killing yourself in the gym and hoping you're going to recover for the next day. So that's really a big shift in terms of the mindset around training for me.
That makes so much sense, kind of looking to keep your training as high quality as possible, maintaining as high a performance as possible, and knowing that that's likely what's going to be growing you best versus just kind of like going in there and working hard. It's like you've got that smart element in there as well, which is really cool. And was there anything else from your coach Stefan, because you had a bit of a training camp with him recently? Did you have any other big take homes from training with him?
Yeah, so he is a very hands-on coach who just he's a very funny, like he speaks German, so he sometimes translates stuff to English in quite a funny way, but at quite a literal way, but it's quite understandable at the same time because of it, because I'm Dutch, so my English isn't my native language either, so we understand each other through that translation almost better. So for example, on the hack squat or leg press, instead of thinking about pushing away yourself or the weight, he's like, think about pulling your knees down when you're extending the leg. So that is mimicking the pulling motion of the hamstring and more of the glutes rather than the quads, because when you're pushing, you're thinking about, okay, how can I use my quads to push myself away, like on a hack squat. But if you're thinking about how can I extend the leg by pulling the knees down, it changes the way you approach a set, and it changes your form as well. Like my problem used to be, like when I go all the way down, thinking about, okay, full range of motion, that's the most important thing here. My hip flexibility would not be good enough for my butt to stay attached to the platform, basically, to the seat behind me. So it would kind of leave, which would then automatically kind of put my lower back at risk and target other muscle groups anyway. But he says, just go deep as you can, but think about the wave of execution that I'm teaching you by pulling the knees down. And then you notice, okay, at some point, the range of motion just stops for the muscle I want to target. And then I got to go back up. Instead of like thinking I got to go all the way down regardless, sometimes it's not the correct choice, because yes, you will then stretch the quads, but that's not my goal now. I want to really focus on the back of the leg. So I want to focus on until what point can my muscles go, until my anatomy basically says, okay, if you go further than this, I'm going to compensate with other stuff. And that you, of course, you can improve this with mobility work, but for now, it really was his takeaway to focus on what can your body do and how can you focus on the muscles that you want to grow into each movement. So I used to just think with a heavy hack squat to just push the weight, go as deep as you can, and then you will grow automatically those muscles. But it doesn't always work that way, because if it did, I would have already developed those muscles by now. And apparently it's not the way that it works for me. So if I used to give this example about Chris Bumstead, I also watched his videos from like his very first videos. You can see him doing the movements, and you can already see his legs were pretty much already as big back then as they were at the last Olympia. So his natural way of movement and his anatomy allowed his muscles to grow into that shape because of how he was built. So that really is genetics. For me, I could train the exact same way, but I would grow very differently. So even if I do the same weight, the same intensity, the same range of motion, my muscles would not respond the same way because my body cannot move in that same manner. So I have to find different ways to train to make my muscles grow in the way I want them to. And that's how you got to be creative at some point. And that's what my coach really has taught me, that not to just go into a movement mindlessly, but also think about how can I target the muscles I want to grow, because otherwise you're always going to end up the same way as you are right now, with strengths here and weaknesses there. So you've got to change something up.
Oh man, I love that. It comes back to that growth mindset again, where if you keep doing what you've always done, you're just going to get the same results as you always have.
Yeah.
It's very similar. The thing that comes to mind for me is like my arms are a strength, when I do pulling movements, I get like a bicep pump. Like I don't need to try for that. I have to really focus on pulling with the specific areas of the back, and I have to get very particular and biased with it. Similar squat patterns, I just grow glutes, adductors. So I have to really think about, okay, when have I stretched my quad to its fullest, and then don't go any deeper just for the sake of it. Like I'm trying to just target this muscle. So I love that. Wesley, I know you're kind of tight on time, so I want to make sure people know, if they aren't, and I'm sure many of them are, if they want to follow you. I mentioned your YouTube, you're big on Instagram as well. Give those a shout out so people know where you are.
Yeah, so you can follow me on my YouTube channel. You can pretty much find me if you just type in Wesley Vissers or Vintage Genetics, which used to be the name I used to go by at the very beginning. And also on my Instagram at Wesley Vissers. And I share everything behind the scenes, especially now. It's January, so we're going to the Arnold Classic, and I'm going to be showing my journey, my road to the Arnold in depth, really on my YouTube channel. I'll also be posting a lot more shorts and reels on my Instagram that are more educational, but also just some interesting stuff there, to really spice things up a little bit for this prep and to kind of find different ways to educate people in a fun way. You know, this is how I started my whole journey on social media, by really putting out information. But nowadays you have to be a bit more creative into reaching more people, because it's kind of saturated. Like when I started, there were only a couple of guys, and I reached millions of people quite easily with just editing everything myself. So it was super easy to reach so many people. But now everybody has such high quality edits, cameras, videos. You gotta really start. The first thing you gotta be yourself, but kind of find a fun way to express your knowledge so people are more eager to listen to you. And that's what I'm going to do, starting pretty much now. So be on the lookout for some nice new videos and interesting content coming on my social media.
Love that. I'll make sure those are linked in the description. And I definitely would love if you take the time to come back on at some point, because I have so many more questions for you, and this has been a really fun chat. But guys, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much, Wesley, for coming on, and we'll catch you next time.
All right, until next time.
Losing weight fast while maintaining muscle mass. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? It isn't though. It's reality, and we know how to do it, and we will help you achieve this. The Minicut movement is an 8-week fat loss program to make you lose a huge chunk of fat while maintaining muscle mass at the same time. We will support you from the beginning to the end so that you see the results you would like to and come out of it much stronger. You'll receive a fully automated spreadsheet that is based on your nutritional needs. You can choose between 6 different male and female training templates. Over 30 videos will guide you through each and every single step of the Minicut so that you're getting the most out of your journey and that you always know what to do. But the best thing is that you can start whenever you want. The Minicut movement is open 24/7. So if you want to learn more or you're ready to sign up, hit the link in the description below. So let's revive stronger together.